Take your seats, please. Leading us in prayer today is Pastor John Armstrong from the Fort Pierre Ministerial Association. That'll be followed by our Pledge of Allegiance by our pages Bridget DeCam from Platte and Matthew Eshe from Canton.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for giving us the blessings of another day. We pray your blessings on the members of this house as they set about doing the important work that faces them. In this long day ahead, help them to make wise decisions and to carry out their responsibilities with high hopes for a better future for our state. May your blessings be present with them throughout this day and every day. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will please call the roll.
Representative Anderson, Bartling, Beal, Bolin, Bordeaux, Bruner, Campbell, Conzett, Craig, Cronin, Deutsch, DeSanto, Dryden, Duvall, Fikert, Gibson, Gosh, Greenfield, Hager, Harrison, Haugard, Hawks, Hawley, Heineman, Holmes, Hunhoff, Hunt, Jensen, Johns, Kaiser, Killer, Kirschman, Klum, Langer, Lateral, Marty, May, McCleary, Mickelson, Munsterman, Norstrup, Otten, Partridge, Peterson, Qualm, Rasmussen, Ring, Romkema, Rounds, Rosum, Russell, Schaefer, Schoenbeck, Shanefish, Schremp, Sly, Soley, Solem, Stalser, Steinhauer, Stevens, Tulson, Versio, Werner, Westra, Wick, Willitson, Woolman, Zickman, Speaker Wink.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Approval of the journal.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Legislative Procedure respectfully reports that the Chief Clerk of the House has had under consideration the House Journal of the 32nd day. All errors, typographical or otherwise, are duly marked in the temporary journal for correction, and we hereby move the adoption of the report. Respectfully submitted, Dean Wing, Chair.
Those in favor of approving the journal signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Journal is approved. At this time, I'm going to ask the new pages to stand up against the rail here, and I will swear them in. This is our last set of pages, and so we will welcome them here after we get the oath. Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of South Dakota, and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of page according to the best of my abilities. Congratulations. Let's welcome the new pages. Is the Wagner government class here? Raise your hands. There we are. On behalf of Representative Qualm and Bartling, I'd like to welcome the Wagner government class and their teacher, Joe Kafka. Welcome to the Capitol, Wagner. What about the Custer High School Student Council? Are they here? Okay, up to my right. They are the Custer High School Student Council with their advisor, Sandy Arsenault. They are Dakota Reese Pryor, Leah Zacher, Siri Trandom, Aaron Jones, and Katie Bradeen. Let's welcome Custer to the Capitol. Communications.
March 7th, 2016. Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Representatives, I have the honor to inform you that on March 7th, 2016, I approved House Bills 1065 and 1164, and the same have been deposited in the office of the Secretary of State. Respectfully submitted, Dennis Dugard, Governor. March 7th, 2016. Mr. Speaker and members of the House of Representatives, I have the honor to inform you that on March 7th, 2016, I approved House Bills 1004, 1007, 1024, 1047, 1069, 1071, 1083, 1092, 1095, 1104, 1121, 1123, and 1179, and the same have been deposited in the office of the Secretary of State. Respectfully submitted, Dennis Dugard, Governor.
Reports of standing committees.
The House Committee on Appropriations respectfully reports that Senate Bill 159 was tabled. Justin R. Cronin, Chair. The Committee on State Affairs respectfully reports that Senate Bill 124, 125, 126, 143, and 162 do pass, and Senate Bill 140 was deferred to the 41st legislative day. Brian G. Gosch, Chair. The Committee on Judiciary respectfully reports that Senate Bill 158 and 169 do pass and be placed on the consent calendar. Senate Bill 168 do pass as amended and be placed on the consent calendar. Senate Bill 21 and 130 were tabled, and Senate Bill 154 was deferred to the 41st legislative day. G. Mark Mickelson, Chair.
Reports of conference committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Conference Committee respectfully reports that it has considered Senate Bill 132 and the amendments thereto made by the House and the disagreement of the two houses thereon, and recommends that Senate Bill 132 be amended as follows. On page 5, line 1 of the House Engrossed Bill, overstrike over $1 million. Respectfully submitted, Justin Cronin, House Committee Chair, Deb Peters, Senate Committee Chair.
Messages.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to return herewith House Bills 1042, 1045, 1099, 1127, 1132, 1153, 1167, 1177, 1204, 1224, and 1243, which have passed the Senate without change. Also, Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to inform your honorable body that House Bill 1139 was tabled. Also, Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to inform your honorable body that House Bills 1077, 1112, and 1225 were indefinitely postponed by the Senate. Also, Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to return herewith House Bill 1094, which has been amended by the Senate, and your concurrence in the amendments is respectfully requested. Respectfully, Kay Johnson, Secretary.
Motions.
Representative Mickelson moves that the House do concur in Senate amendments to House Bill 1140.
That motion having been made and seconded for House Bill 1140 to be concurred is now up for consideration. Are there any remarks? Representative Mickelson.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 1140 we considered a few weeks ago. It dealt with certain county zoning matters. We had 17 or 18 no votes on the House. We sent it over to the Senate, and for those of you that objected to House Bill 1140, we made it slightly less objectionable in Senate. In the committee, they took a provision out that would have required any person attempting to appeal a zoning officer's decision to post a $250 bond. We removed that requirement from the legislation. So With that, I would urge your concurrence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Mickelson. Further remarks on the concurrence of House Bill 1140? Representative Gibson.
Question for the sponsor, please.
State your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm having a little trouble deciphering all of the changes, but what happens actually if a zoning officer does not follow the rules that are posted on the agenda or any of the other open meeting laws that are currently in effect?
Representative Mickelson, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I'm not sure that that's subject to the changes that the Senate made, and would probably have been better made when we debated the bill on the House floor. But if a zoning officer doesn't follow the requirements of the law, then their actions would always be subject to appeal and to be contested by a citizen.
Representative Gibson, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have another question then on a follow-up after that. So if the rules are not followed under the current law, then I, as a person who did not get proper notification and so on and so forth, would it be up to me then to just go ahead and file a lawsuit? Do I have any other measures that I can take without actually hiring an attorney and going into litigation on per this bill right now as it sits?
Representative Mickelson, go ahead and answer.
Sure. Yes, you would have many other remedies, including showing up at the meeting and contesting the fact that there was no prior public notice. You could also go prevail on your county commissioners or any bureau or agency of the county to say, listen, we didn't follow the public notice requirements and you need to reschedule this and make sure that you act in accordance with this. Just to be clear, Representative, from here on, nothing in this bill has anything to do with the fact pattern that you're describing.
Representative Gibson, further comments? Further remarks on the concurrence of House Bill 1140? Any further remarks or questions? Any further remarks on the concurrence of House Bill 1140? Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is concurrence of House Bill 1140. Those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. The members will proceed to vote. Representative Cronin?
Personal privilege.
Granted.
I'd like to introduce the House to the unfortunate and fortunate woman who has been with me for 35 and a half years now. She raised 6 kids, 6 wonderful kids, 6 successful kids, and she's still down here checking up on me, but I was reassured by the gentleman from Watertown that she probably needs to get on the road and babysit some of the kids back home of her 19 grandkids. So if you'd help me in welcoming my mother, Janet Cronin.
Mrs. Cronin, welcome to the Capitol.
Representative Greenfield and Steinhauer.
Will the clerk please display the vote?
Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted. Mr. Speaker, there are 50 yeas, 19 nays, 1 excused.
House Bill 1140, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby concurred.
Representative Westra moves that the House do concur in Senate amendments to House Bill 1238.
That motion having been made and seconded for House Bill 1238 to be concurred is now up for consideration. Are there any remarks? Representative Westra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We did pass this bill out of the House here a few weeks ago as well. Went over to the Senate, and they made they eliminated one sentence on the bill with regards to approving the payments from the Speaker and the President Pro Tem and following e-board rules. But the key thing is the overall intent of the bill, which was to make it or allow an appeal process for members of both the Senate and the House to appeal the travel policy to the e-board is still intent, and I would ask for your concurrence on House Bill 1238. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any further remarks on the concurrence of House Bill 1238? Any further remarks? Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is concurrence of House Bill 1238. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. The members will proceed to vote.
Representative Dryden, Harrison, Lateral. Representative Lateral. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 67 yeas, 2 nays, 1 excused.
House Bill 1238, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby concurred.
Representative Gosh moves that the House Committee on Appropriations be instructed to deliver Senate Bill 159 to the floor of the House pursuant to Joint Rule 7-7.
That motion having been made and seconded for Senate Bill 159 to be sent back to the House Appropriations Committee is now up for consideration. Are there any remarks? Representative Gosh.
Just briefly, Mr. Speaker, this is the school choice bill. I ask you to support the delivery of the bill to the floor so we can have a debate on the merits and go forward. Thank you.
Any further remarks? Any further remarks on bringing the Senate Bill 159 or sending it back to the Appropriations Committee? Is he supported? We need 1/6 of the body. He is supported. Thank you. This will be put on the House calendar for tomorrow. Representative Wick?
Personal privilege, please.
Granted.
Right behind you, there are 4 people here who are very, very near and dear to me. First of all, I'd like to introduce my wife, Chelsea, who made the journey out here today. Along with her, I have my 2 sons. My oldest son is Connor. My youngest is Cody. And the driver today is my father, Bill Wick.
Thank you. Welcome to the Capitol, Wick family.
Representative Johns moves that the Committee on State Affairs be instructed to deliver Senate Bill 140 to the floor of the House pursuant to Joint Rule 7-7.
That motion having been made and seconded for Senate Bill 140 to be sent back to the State Affairs Committee is now up for consideration. Are there any remarks?
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Johns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking that Senate Bill 140, which is an act to eliminate life sentences without parole for juveniles, that being those people under the age of 18 at the time of the crime, be returned to the State Affairs for further consideration and action.
Further remarks on the sending the Senate Bill 140 back to the State Affairs Committee? Any further remarks? Any further remarks on Senate Bill 140 going back to State Affairs? Representative Gosch.
I've been asked to stand and comment, so I am. We had probably a half hour worth of hearing. We heard both sides. We had a fair hearing. A lot of information was shared. And leave it up to the floor here to decide whether you want it on the floor or not. It was a close vote. It was 7-6. It's an interesting issue, a legal debate. If you want to hear more about it, support the smoke out. If you're satisfied you know enough, stay in your seats. Thank you.
Further remarks on the sending Senate Bill 140 back to State Affairs? Is he supported? Those in support, please rise. He is supported. Thank you. That'll be put on the House calendar tomorrow.
Representative Gosch moves that when we adjourn today, we adjourn to convene at 10 o'clock a.m. on Tuesday, March 8th, the 34th legislative day.
All in favor of the Gosch motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Consent calendar items.
Senate Bill 104, an act to set the time period for when an agency may promulgate rules.
Consent calendar bills having had their second reading are for consideration and final passage. Are there any questions? Any questions concerning Senate Bill 104? Any questions? Seeing none, the question for the House is final passage of the bills on the consent calendar. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. The members will proceed to vote.
Hunhoff votes aye. Jensen votes aye.
Representative Hawks. Granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I'd like to introduce my eldest child. She was
Anderson votes aye.
able to come with me this week. Ruby is up here on the left-hand side.
Welcome to the Capitol.
Cronin votes aye. Representative Beal, Johns, Mickelson, Partridge, Ring, Romkema. Romkema votes aye. Beal votes aye. Representative Mickelson, Partridge, and Ring. Partridge is excused. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Will you please display the vote?
Mr. Speaker, there are 66 yeas, 4 excused.
Consent bills having received a majority vote of the members elect are hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct. Second reading of Senate bills.
Senate Bill 107, an act to clarify certain safety zone restrictions on hunting.
Senate Bill 107, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Representative Qualm.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and honorable members of this House. What we're talking about here is improving safety zone around occupied dwellings, schools, churches, and livestock. Last week, I had a handout passed out. And if you all take a look at that, you will be able to understand a little better what I'm talking about. Currently, when you have a residence, you have 660 feet on each side of that residence is a no hunting zone, okay? But when you get on the opposite side of the road, if you do not own the land, if there's another landowner, that landowner or someone he gives written permission to can hunt in that ditch. So what we're saying with this bill, we are taking away that right for them to be able to hunt in that ditch, just to create a little further safety zone for the residents. I'm a big property rights guy. I believe in property rights, but in this instance, I believe the occupied, the school, the church trumps property rights, just for the safety factor. I guess really that's all I'm going to say about. I think there's some opponents, and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Very good. Further remarks on Senate Bill 107? Representative Heineman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I was the guilty one that pulled it off the consent calendar. It went through the Senate side and through the committee unanimously, so I had some reservations about doing that. But when I read the bill, as the proponent indicated, it was removing the right of the adjacent landowner to be able to discharge a firearm in his right-of-way or the adjacent right-of-way to his property. I was okay with the idea that if the safety zone is protected, then not only should the adjoining landowner, but the landowner or the dwelling holder in that particular facility should not be able to discharge a firearm. So I was in agreement with that, but that was not agreeable to the proponents. They wanted the right to be able to discharge a firearm in the public right-of-way in front of their property, but they did not want to allow me or someone that I designated that has adjacent property right across the road to be able to discharge a firearm. So that's why I opposed it. We tried to work out an agreement, but that's the way it is. So I encourage you to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Heineman. Further remarks on Senate Bill 107? Further remarks on Senate Bill 107? Representative Otten.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, fellow members. I'm going to kind of piggyback on the previous speaker's comments. If you take a look at that map, it shows a single residence here, but I was sitting in my driveway over the weekend, and I did vote for the bill in committee. I will not be supporting the bill today. I obviously was asleep at the wheel a little bit because I missed the word only in there, and that's the key word in this whole thing. But as I was sitting in my driveway yesterday looking, I don't have just a single residence where I live. As I look north, I have 4 more residents, and there's no more than about 70 yards in between any of those. And as I look south, we have 3 more residents there. So this would all of a sudden strip away all the landowners' rights from across the road for literally 1 mile running. And for me, I guess, that's my property and I've had the ability to hunt in there, give permission to my kids to hunt in that ditch for 20, 30, 50 years, you know, I guess I would have a little problem with now all of a sudden that being taken away from me. And it's not just for a little 660-foot piece, it's now literally for the whole mile. And I also remember the days of when they had all the issues around, about goose hunting up here around Pier. This bill also says livestock. I remember the days up north of Pier and south of Pier when landowners would sit there and they would put out calf huts and fences and put a calf every 200 yards. That's 600 feet. That way they could prevent goose hunters from sitting in the ditch and pass shoot geese on that side of the road. Now, if you're on the other side of the road and have permission from the landowner, you could do that. This bill would take that right away from me as a landowner on the other side to be able to hunt in that ditch. And I just don't think it's right to do that, I guess, and that's why I'll be opposing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Naughton. Further remarks on Senate Bill 107? Further remarks on Senate Bill 107? Anybody like to speak for the first time before Representative Qualm speaks for the second? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be brief. I just want to say that you can get permission from the landowner, from the people that occupy. If you get that, that's fine. It's not saying you can't. You can go get permission to do that. I just think this is a safety issue, and once again, I think the dwelling trumps just bare land. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks? Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 107. Those in favor will vote yea, those opposed nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. The members will proceed to vote.
Mickelson votes aye. Hager votes aye. Dryden votes aye. DeSanto votes aye. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 40 yeas, 29 nays, 1 excused.
Senate Bill 107, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Are there any questions on the title? Seeing none, title is deemed correct. He's here. He's in the just go ahead. He's in the
Representative Gosh moves that Senate Bill 46 be placed to precede Senate Bill 2 on today's calendar.
Second. All in favor of the Gosh motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Senate Bill 46, an act to revise the notice filing fee for open-end management companies.
Senate Bill 46, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Partridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 46 was brought to us in appropriations by the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor deals with a bunch of varied interests, ranging from unemployment insurance to real estate to securities. This bill has to do with the securities portion of their daily task. Senate Bill 46 basically is looking to provide more efficiency in the Department of Labor by creating a two-tiered system instead of a three-tiered system for open-ended management companies. You may know them as mutual funds. Essentially, if a mutual fund has $250 million of assets or more, they will pay $2,000, as they have. But if they have 250 or less, or just under 250, then they will pay $1,000. This is to help the department, frankly, be more efficient and just have a two-tiered instead of the three-tiered system. I encourage your favorable consideration of Senate Bill 46. Thank you.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 46? Any further remarks on Senate Bill 46? It does have an appropriation measure in it, so it's a 2/3 vote. The question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 46. Those in favor vote yea, those opposed nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. The members will proceed to vote.
Jensen votes aye. Representative Johns. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 68 yeas, 1 nay, 1 excused.
Senate Bill 46, having received a 2/3 vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
Senate Bill 2, an act to revise the distribution of the revenue from the Alcoholic Beverage Fund.
Senate Bill 2, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Heineman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. Senate Bill 2, which deals with the Alcohol Beverage Fund. Most of you are aware we had a county-wide task force this summer that looked into issues that the counties were seeing as far as increased costs and the reasons for that. The testimony showed that presently that alcohol beverage fund is split 25% municipalities, 75% the state general fund. When county individuals, employees, and representatives testified, they brought up the fact that many of the crimes in the law enforcement, that is, costs that are incurred on the countywide level, are because of alcohol related. In fact, they testified that 80%, up to 80% of the costs are involved in alcohol. When the committee heard that we did not allocate any money of that alcohol beverage fund to the counties, they were quite surprised, to be honest with you. In fact, most of us did not know that. As a result of that discussion, we thought it was appropriate that the county should at least receive a share of that alcohol beverage fund. And actually, it was passed out of our committee unanimously, a third going to the cities, a third to the county, and a third to the state. It was then amended to have 25% cities, which is what it is now, and 25% counties, and then 50% to the state as a general fund. So I urge you to consider this bill that would reallocate the alcohol beverage fund, 25% to the counties, 25% to the cities, and 50% to the state. I urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Heineman. Further remarks on Senate Bill 2? Any further remarks on Senate Bill 2? Representative Greenfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to reiterate some of the remarks that the former representative said. Senate Bill 2 is a good bill. You know, our counties have a lot of undue pressure that have been placed upon them and expense put on them. We touted our diversion program at the state level as experiencing success. Good for them. But we have had to then have the counties come in and bat the cleanup on this. In my county, we've seen astronomical drain due to alcohol and drug violations. I've seen the statements of Spink County's had to write checks for $15,000 per month just to one jail to house our prisoners. And that doesn't include ER, it doesn't include transportation, it doesn't include sending somebody out to take these prisoners to the jails, pick them up for court, take them back, and so on and so forth. Now, it's not going to offset the total cost to our counties, but at least it's going to show some gesture to them that we are at least in this with them. We are trying hard to come up with some money for them. And I would hope that you would be able to cast a favorable green vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Greenfield. Further remarks on Senate Bill 2? Any further remarks on Senate Bill number 2? Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this came out of our summer study, and I'm happy with the bill. I hope that everybody can support it. Everybody's been listening to me complain about the dire circumstances that my counties are in, and now we're seeing it across the state. And so I just encourage you to pass this bill. We'll come back next year, and maybe we can address some of the other issues that the counties are dealing with. But this is a good bill, so thank you.
Thank you, Representative May. Further remarks on Senate Bill number 2? Representative Fikert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and honorable members of the House. I, too, served on the task force this summer for additional funding for the counties, and I think most of you know that I served a lot of years as a county commissioner, and I saw a lot of these bills, the cost of the incarceration, the state's attorneys, the sheriff's office, and a very high percentage of the caseload was related to alcohol. I remember back in the middle 2000s when the counties tried desperately to get a nickel per drink on alcohol beverages, never got any traction with that whatsoever. This is a good bill, and I'd like to echo the comments made by the previous representatives, and I would encourage you all to vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fikert. Further remarks on Senate Bill 2? Any further remarks? Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 2. Those in favor vote yea, those opposed nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine and the members will proceed to vote. This is a 2/3 vote due to an appropriation measure.
Representative Rasmussen. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 69 yeas, 1 excused.
Senate Bill 2, having received a 2/3 vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
Senate Bill 69, an act to require accredited schools to accept transfer credits for courses taken by students from other accredited schools during the summer and to declare an emergency.
Senate Bill 69, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Deutsch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. Senate Bill 69 is an act to require accredited schools to accept transfer credits for courses taken by students from other accredited schools during the summer. Mr. Speaker, I also have an amendment. May I bring it at this time? Did I?
You had some preparatory remarks. I would feel better if you let somebody else introduce the amendment. Representative Rounds. That be 69CC.
Yes, it would.
Has it been distributed?
Yes, it has.
Do you wish to move it at this time?
Yes, I do.
Is there a second? Remarks on the
I
amendment.
wish to defer my remarks to the good representative from Brookings, Cottington, Dual, and Grant County.
Thank you. Representative Deutsch, go ahead.
My kind thanks. May I speak to both at the same time?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think what I'll start with, I would just want to read the first couple of lines of this bill since the amendment changes a portion of it. So I'm going to start on line 6 and go through 10, and if you'll pull out the bill and follow it with me. Any student accredited by the Department of Education shall accept transfer credits earned by a student for any course taken by the student from another school accredited by the Department of Education outside the regular school term, meaning the summer term, as established pursuant to 1326-2. And here's the change with the amendment. However, an accredited school is only required to accept the transfer credits if the student notifies a school administrator of the credits sought prior to taking the course and if the student has not already taken the course. So, again, this is an act to require accredited schools to accept transfer credits for courses taken by students from other accredited schools during the summer. Now, here's the main issue. If a student wants to take a summer class, the student should be able to take a summer class from any accredited school in South Dakota, and the credits should count. I believe that should just be a standard policy for the state of South Dakota. The rub is we currently have several school districts in South Dakota that don't allow it. So the question I pose to all of you is, why should there be a handful of school districts in South Dakota, I think there's 2 or 3, frankly, why should they be allowed to refuse transfer credits from the summer? Why would students go forward? Why would students take classes unless we think the student thinks that they're going to be of benefit, that they're going to help the student move forward? So here's a couple of scenarios that I just paint for you. Number 1, a student can't get all their classes in, and this happens all the time in Watertown. If we've got an advanced student that's taking AP Bio and AP Chem, and they want to take marching band at the same time, well, the schedule is just too full. They can't do it. Under this bill, they could take a class during the summertime from another school district that offers the class, so during the school year, they could get everything in. Scenario 2, a student flunks their class. They get a D or an F in their class. What happens under this bill with the amendment? The local school district decides if they're going to allow the student to repeat it, either at the school district or outside of the school district. Now, hopefully that'll occur, obviously. But that's another scenario. And then the third scenario is, say a student gets a B in a class, and he wants to try to improve his GPA. He wants to get an A. So again, local decision under this bill and the amendment to make that determination if the student can repeat the class at another district or in the same local district. That's really the intent of the bill. There is an emergency clause on it because, frankly, right now, if you've got kids, you know that they're planning for the summer. They're scheduling their summer classes right now. So we've got an emergency clause on it. The bill passed out of the Senate 33-1 and out of House Ed 12-2. I'll stand by for questions. I would certainly appreciate your support. Thank you.
Further remarks on the Senate Bill 69 as amended? Further remarks? Representative Hawks?
Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the sponsor.
Question for the sponsor. State your question.
Could I get you to explain on the amendment? The wording says, and if the student has not already taken the course. One of the reasons you stated for bringing this bill is so that a student who has failed a class can retake the course to get a passing grade. This amendment, the way it's worded, I read it as saying if they've taken the class already, we don't have to accept the credits. So my fear here is that you're precluding students from taking summer credit recovery.
Representative Deutsch, would you like to answer that question?
I'd love to, thank you. And thank you for the question. So I tried to anticipate your question by reading this. So I'll reread this, and then I'll do my best to answer it. However, an accredited school is only required to accept the transfer credit if the student notifies a school administrator of the credit sought prior to taking the course, and if the student has not already taken the course. So if you've got a student that's taken the course, flunks the course, the school administrator makes the decision. He's not required to accept it, but it's up to him. It's up to his or her discretion, local control. That's the intent, and I believe the wording is set forth.
Representative Hawks, you still have the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I've still, the way I'm reading it, I feel like this precludes students from taking credit recovery in the summer. I'm concerned that that's the way it's going to be. It's going to be read by administrators, and I feel like if we're going to allow students, if we're going to allow transfer of credits, one of the main reasons that we allow for that is for credit recovery. That's what the purpose of summer school originally was for credit recovery. I think that this amendment does a disservice to those students who are trying to take credit recovery.
Okay, thank you. Further remarks on Senate Bill 69? Further remarks? Representative Boland?
Mr. Speaker, well, thank you very much. Well, before coming into the legislature, I served for 11 years as the athletic director in the Canton school system, and one of the facts about the Activities Association is that you have to keep your grades up during the school year to be able to participate in interscholastic activities, primarily athletics, in the future. And my fear with this bill is that it would allow individuals to you might say fail classes during the fall and the spring semester, and then somehow try to make those classes up in the summer. That is specifically forbidden by the Activity Association bylaws, the last I checked. So I just think this bill opens up a number of avenues that are very dangerous for the schools as far as that particular aspect, other aspects of local control. I don't think this bill is needed, and I would urge your defeat of this particular piece of legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Boland. Further remarks on Senate Bill 69? Further remarks? Representative Sly. State your point.
Are we still on the amendment or on the bill?
On the amendment. Sorry. Keep your comments on the amendment at this time. Further remarks on the amendment 69CC. Further remarks? Hearing none, the question being Representative Deutsch's motion to amend Senate Bill 69. Does any member wish the motion to amend be reread? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Those in favor, please stand. Those in favor of the amendment 69CC, please stand. Amendment fails. So we're back on the Senate Bill 69, the original bill. Representative Hawks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment. It's Amendment 69CD. It has been distributed, and I move it at this time.
That's CD.
Yes.
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Remarks on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I would agree that there are a lot of things about this bill that I do not agree with, I do see some merits in allowing some guidelines for school districts to accept accept accredited courses that are taken during the summer. However, I would like to put some protections in. That's what this amendment is meant to do. What this does is protect students who wish to advance their learning opportunities while also protecting the school's local decision-making process, as well as the integrity of a school's graduation requirement. As all of you know, I was a teacher in a public high school for 10 years. I was a tough teacher. As you can ask any of the students who left my class, I was a tough teacher with high expectations. I expected them to perform well in my class. I expected them to work hard in my class. And I didn't want them to say, well, I'm either going to fail this class or I'm not going to take it so I can teach or shop. And then I'm going to go find a teacher who's easier or a teacher who's going to pass out a packet, because that's what they do for credit recovery. They're going to give them a packet, they take it home, they fill out the packet, they bring it back, and they're done. I want to protect the integrity of a school's requirements. I want to protect the integrity of the standards of the school and what the curriculum decisions have been for that school district. So let's protect local control and give them some protections in terms of which transfer credits they're going to accept and which ones they're not going to accept. I would encourage your acceptance of this amendment if we're going to carry this bill forth.
Further remarks on the Amendment 69 CD. Representative Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for the sponsor of the amendment.
State your question.
My question is are these the same accredited classes that are accepted by the Board of Regents for our state institutions and then also the tech schools?
Representative Hawks, would you like to answer that question?
In terms of what? I'm sorry, could you clarify?
Could you repeat the question, please, Representative Jensen?
Yes. So the way that you're trying to uphold the integrity in this amendment, you said that your classes are a higher integrity than the classes over at Lincoln High School in Sioux Falls. So my question is, are those the same classes that are taught at Lincoln High School that are going to be accepted by the Board of Regents for admissions and then also for the tech schools for admissions? Would those be the classes that are similar?
Representative Hawks, would you like to answer that question?
If I understand what you're saying, my class was a required class. So those classes tend to be very similar in terms of the standards that they meet and what they're teaching in the course. The delivery method, the curriculum materials, that's all local decision, and so that's what I'm asking for, is for administrators of a school to be able to review those materials to make sure that the rigor is the same, because it's not the same from one school to the next. And your example of the school in Sioux Falls, probably not the best example because they do have a very rigorous program in Sioux Falls. However, there are other school districts around the area and around the state that may not have the same rigors as those schools.
Representative Jensen, does that answer your question?
It does, Mr. Speaker. May I continue to comment?
You still have the floor.
Thank you. My opinion of this is I would defeat the amendment because I would allow and understand that the Board of Regents will accept these classes just the same from school to school to school, as well the tech schools, depending on what grade it is. That's how we have the system set up, so I'd urge defeat this amendment. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Jensen. Further remarks on the Amendment 69 CD. Representative Sly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I concur with the previous speaker. When we have courses in our schools, does it matter if you're going to school in Harding County or Watertown or Wagner or Yankton? If it's a biology class, it's a biology class. And it's accepted if I'm living in Wagner and I move to Watertown. If I took the biology class in Wagner, I don't have anyone looking and scrutinizing and looking at how that course was taught to see if those credits transfer into the next school where I transfer into. So I think that this is a way to weaken the bill, and I would suggest that we defeat this amendment and that we go on and pass Senate Bill 69.
Thank you, Representative Sly. Further remarks on Senate Bill 69. Representative Ring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this amendment. There's no question that accreditation provides a certain set of standards, but there's also no question that there are teachers who will circumvent those standards in some cases, and My concern with the bill as originally written is that it allows for the possibility of what you might call course shopping, so that if you'd rather not take a particular course at your school because you know you have a tough teacher, but you can find another place where it's not quite so difficult or maybe much less difficult, you take that during the summer. This allows each individual district to maintain their own standards by evaluating the course. I realize that accreditation makes a difference, but sometimes it's not as rigorous as it ought to be. I encourage passing this amendment.
Thank you, Representative Ring. Further remarks on the amendment 69 CD. Representative Wallman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I'd urge you to resist this amendment. And for the scenario I brought up in the House Education Committee, say you have a child who's got divorced parents. Say the one parent lives in the Sioux Falls area and the other parent lives in Rapid, and that child lives and operates their summer in Rapid. So they decide to take a summer class in Rapid. I think it's very unfair for them to come back home, looking to take that credit back home, and then have that school district say, no, your credit doesn't count because you were in Rapid for this. I think the teacher shop argument is an unfair argument, and we have to remember in the end we're there for the student and their education, what's best for them. So I'd urge you to resist this amendment and go on to pass the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wallman. Further remarks on 69 CD. We're going to vote on the amendment. Further remarks? Would anybody like to speak for the first time before Representative Deutsch speaks for the second? Representative Deutsch, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also ask you to resist the amendment. This puts the school administrators in a really tough situation if you were to look at item number 2. I mean, how are they going to assess the rigor of every teacher? How do they know teacher in Rapid City, teacher in Pierre, teacher in Watertown? I just don't think it's a realistic expectation. I think it really guts the intent of the bill, and I ask you to please resist it. Thank you.
Further remarks on the amendment 69 CD? Would anybody like the amendment be reread? Would anybody like to speak for the first time before Representative Rings speaks for the second? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The word gets around, particularly if you're trying to avoid the kind of courses that this amendment is trying to avoid. The word gets around. I remember a dean at the business school saying there were certain schools that he could identify, that when a student came into the business school from there, they would do well, particularly in math or particularly in whatever. He knew which schools turned out a good product and which schools didn't. The superintendents know that, or the principals know that as well. This gives them an opportunity to maintain their own standards of their own school. Thank you.
Further remarks? Would anybody like to speak for the first time before Representative Hawks speaks for the second? Representative Hawks, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to also point out with this amendment that although the language of the bill is dictative and says that they shall be accepted, the language of the amendment is permissive and the wording is may. They may refuse to accept the credits. It still gives the school administrator the opportunity to look at the merits of the credits being asked for, gives them the opportunity to do the research that they want to, ask the questions that they need to, and grant those credits if they meet the requirements of the school district. It's permissive. It's not dictatorial.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on the amendment 69 CD? Further remarks? Would anyone like the amendment to be reread? Have questions? Hearing none, the question being Representative Hawks' motion to amend Senate Bill 69. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Motion fails. We're back to the original bill, Senate Bill 69. Representative Mickelson.
Well, I have a son who's a freshman at Lincoln High School in Sioux Falls, and they offer summer classes at the Career and Tech Academy. And it can be pretty difficult for a school official at Lincoln High School to approve a student to go take a summer class. In his case, it wasn't any of these cast of characters or cat stories that you're hearing. He wanted to take geometry so he could get all of his advanced math classes in as is required at some of the top colleges. I think we all know that schools can sometimes be territorial. And I have a statute site. If you're interested, you can go check out something that's analogous. Statute site 135343. Up until 1998, as the good representative from Vermillion said, the other 5 or 6 regional institutions decided they didn't want to take transfer credits from Black Hills State. And finally, the legislature passed a law and said, you're going to have to take transfer credits from every other university because they're all accredited. So I guess the question is, if you're accredited public school and you're going to summer school, then there ought to be a really good reason not to take it other than we want to protect the classes that we offer. So I'm rising in support of this bill, and I urge your yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mickelson. Further remarks on the Senate Bill 69? Representative Sly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is about the word may or shall. We're moving into a different arena with many opportunities for student learning beyond the traditional walls within a school building. Either we can take those different deliveries of learning to another level, or we can put up roadblocks to keep things the way they've always been done. When online learning first began, there was skepticism as to whether this would work or not. Well, even classes that we're taking in the summer, there's always the need to make sure the courses are valid, high quality, and meeting the expectations of that level being taught. Provides a variety of challenges, but that means we shouldn't just walk away from them, but let's work through it. Some of the arguments were schools can already do what this requires, and it happens often. That's true. There are schools that are doing it, but it should not be used by individual schools to prevent a student who wants to excel from being able to take those summer classes and have them accepted back into that school. It should be, all students should be able to do it, not just whether you happen to live in one school district and they say no, and you live in another district and they say yes. It can lead to watered down credits. That was another argument. Well, we need to make sure that the criteria, what we're teaching in our schools, in our summer school classes or in our regular school classes, that we set the standards. But in South Dakota, we don't go in and dictate what every school district has to do for curriculum, the methods they use for teaching. We don't do that in South Dakota. We know, and if we know that there's someone, a particular school district that is not at a certain level, there's a process in ways to go back and look at that. With no seat time required for credits, it could lead to a credit mill. Ladies and gentlemen, these are South Dakota accredited schools that they're taking these classes from. They're not off someplace in some other Netherland. They're South Dakota public accredited schools where they are taking these summer school classes. The other thing that was brought up is that sometimes students would just take the path of least resistance, and that was alluded to a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, if those students are looking for a path of least resistance, think back to when you were taking classes in school. Would you dedicate your summer to take additional classes if you were trying to find the easy way out? Also, another argument was that we look at class rank and GPA. Well, I believe if those who are willing to go above and beyond that traditional school setting to take other courses that are either not offered in a particular order in your school or you want to advance where you're going, I would say Good for those students that are trying to go above and beyond what we're doing. We're not talking necessarily about credit recovery. I believe that's another conversation. This is in regard to if students want to take classes above and beyond what they've done in their regular classroom setting, they should be able to do that. So the question is, who should decide which classes a student can take and receive credit at their own school? We're at a crossroads of traditional learning, and we have to look at options outside those school walls that we have been thinking about for so long. Is that a student and parent decision, or should it be up to an administrator? Or should it be a combination of both? We need to have criteria to know that the coursework is solid and meets the standards of our state for every subject. But does it really matter what format the student learns it? Vote yes on Senate Bill 69.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 69? Representative Gosh?
Mr. Speaker, I respectfully call the previous question.
All in favor of calling the question signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 69. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. Members will proceed to vote. This will be a 2/3 vote due to an emergency clause.
Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please unlock the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 40 yeas, 29 nays, 1 excused.
Representative Deutsch.
Move to reconsider.
Yeah, according to Joint Rules 513-1, if the affirmative vote for a bill containing an emergency clause is less than 2/3, but more than 1/2 of the members elect, the vote shall be immediately reconsidered. So I would ask for comments on reconsideration. Representative Gosh.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Members of the body, I would move to strike lines 2 through 4 on page 2.
Comments on your motion?
Yes, that would remove the emergency clause from the bill.
Further comments on that motion? Further comments on that motion to strip the emergency clause off the bill? If not, those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Motion carries. Representative Deutsch?
Move to
Comments on the amended Senate Bill 69.
Move to pass the bill as amended.
Okay. Further comments? Representative Bolin?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you can probably anticipate, we're having some differences within the educational community that's found here on the floor. I go back. This is not needed in this state. This is a unfortunate bill that's come here masquerading as one thing and actually being another. I urge you strongly, 4 of you, 5 of you who voted for this bill, please vote this bill down. We do not need this bill in this state. You've already heard me before. Thank you very much.
Further remarks? Senate Bill 69. Representative Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to read just a couple lines from the bill. On, let me see here, line 10. If the student fails to provide the advance notice, well, in fact, let me back up to line 9. However, an accredited school is only required to accept the transfer credits if the student notifies a school administrator of the credits sought prior to taking the course. If the student fails to provide the advance notice, the school may refuse to accept the credits. So I guess the point is, we still have local control here. This is not a student who's going to go out and try and pull a fast one, if you will. I think there are local control checks and balances in place with this. There are multiple school districts that are not providing this sort of cooperation, but yet we've retained some local control here. I think this is actually with the amendment, it's not a bad bill. So maybe it's something we ought to go with, and I hope you'll support us.
Thank you, Representative Hager. Further remarks on Senate Bill 69 as amended? Representative Hawks.
Question for the sponsor.
State your question.
Can you inform us of what kind of efforts have been made at a local level to alleviate this problem by creating a policy within the school district at question, or school districts at question, to see if this could be alleviated at a local level rather than having a mandate from the state to require this to happen?
Representative Deutsch, would you like to answer that question?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Speaker. You know, there's a lot of school districts. I couldn't speak for all of them, so it's really hard for me to respond in any degree of specificity.
You still have the floor, Representative Hawks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll speak from experience with a couple of the school districts that I'm familiar with. The policy changes that would allow for this to happen at a local level are in the works. They are working on a policy to make this better, to set out the rules and regulations for allowing for the acceptance of transfer credits. I think we should allow some time for those school districts to come to a local decision, to work with their local school boards, to work with their local communities before we mandate to them, you are going to do this because we said you are going to do this. Allowing for that local control is something that we speak to almost daily on this floor. Let's keep school decisions local. Let's allow the local school districts to set forth policies. Let's let the locals take care of it, unless we don't want them to. Let's allow the local school districts some time to develop those policies and alleviate this problem.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on Senate Bill 69? Representative Sly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the body. This is about equity. This is about opportunity for all students, not just if you happen to be in a district that is accepting that. By the word may or shall, that gives the local district, if you happen to live in that district and they say, no, we can't accept it, that child is losing out on an opportunity to be able to accelerate their learning if they choose to. If you have school districts that say, yes, we will accept them, good for that student. But if they happen to live in a different district, that closes a door for them. That closes an opportunity for them to move forward in their education. And isn't that what it's all about? That we want all students to have opportunities and without those roadblocks for them at every district to be able to take those classes in the summer. I would urge you to vote yes.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 69 as amended? Further remarks on Senate Bill 69 as amended? Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 69 as amended. Those in favor will vote yea, those opposed nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. Members will proceed to vote.
Representative Munsterman. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 35 yeas, 33 nays, 2 excused.
Senate Bill 69, having failed to receive a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared lost.
Senate Bill 129, an act to establish certain suicide awareness and prevention training requirements for certain school employees based on the Jason Flatt Act.
Senate Bill 129, having had its second reading, is up for consideration final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative DeSanto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every 11 days in the state of South Dakota, we lose a teenager to suicide. Currently, suicide is the second leading cause of death in our state among teenagers. Who do our students confide in? Who do they spend the majority of their time with? With their teachers. This legislation requires individuals within our public schools who are currently required to have a teaching certificate to take a contact hour worth of education on suicide awareness and prevention. We also ask that the Board of Education will oversee the process. SB 129 gives authority to the Board of Education to promulgate rules and to require that 1 hour of training in suicide awareness and prevention. This training will be required when individuals are seeking and renewing their teaching certificate. The Department of Education shall consult with suicide prevention and counseling experts and identify evidence-based resources and approved content. The list of those resources and training requirements shall be made available to the public. The Department of Education was extremely helpful in working with us and were proponents of this bill in committee. They added a lot of value and insight on how to best implement this legislation. During the testimony in committee, we heard from parents who had heartbreakingly lost their children to suicide. They feel a tremendous amount of loss and confusion, but their level of bravery was truly an inspiration to everyone in the room. Our compassion and my personal gratitude towards them cannot be expressed strongly enough for sharing their stories. This is truly an epidemic in the state of South Dakota, and it is preventable. With this legislation, we can help prevent suicide, save lives, and help kids find meaning and value in their life. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative DeSanto. Further remarks on Senate Bill 129. Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and Your Honor, Mr. Sheriff.
Carry on.
Mr. Speaker.
There we go.
You know, nobody's for suicide. I mean, there's no two ways about that. I mean, it's one of those topics that, you know, is a bad situation regardless of how you're involved in it. And I'm sure many of you, like myself, have had someone who's committed suicide, and it leaves a lot of questions involved. But I stand in opposition for this bill, not because I don't think education is important, but I am standing up against this bill for this situation. You know, our schools are constantly having to deal with lots of issues and lots of problems. And, you know, the school districts are aware of what those problems are, those situations are. They have in-service all of the time. And what this bill is doing here is causing them to spend more time, and particularly with the teachers in this situation of constantly having this education. And as you can see what the bill provides, it's not enough if it was just that at some point our educators have to take some education regarding suicide and suicide prevention. I don't have a problem with that. But what this bill says is that every time they renew their license, some of that education that they're required to take has to be dealing with suicide. And I think with the multiple issues that are happening in our school district, I don't think we need to do that. I think our school districts are smart enough to deal with that without us having to put this into law and make another mandate in it. When you look at this bill, it also says that we're going to allow the Department of Education to promulgate rules. Rules about what? You know, we're not having really any input in that. The second of all that I have a concern with is the fact that it talks about not only does it deal with teachers, administrators, but it also indicates other educational professionals. Who are they? You know, who are these people that we're talking about? And so in this situation here, I really don't think it's necessary for us to do that. I think we're getting down into the nitty-gritty of what our school districts do and the type of things that they require of our teachers. My guess, there's not a person in here who has not somewhere along the line been exposed to suicide, who have not taken classes themselves, and clearly the people in education have done that just in the regular classes that they're required to take. And so I would recommend and encourage you to vote against this bill. I don't think it's necessary. I think this truly is something of local control. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Stevens. Further remarks on Senate Bill 129. Representative Boland.
Thank you. Question for the sponsor of the bill.
State your question.
My question is the following. I would like the chief sponsor of the bill to comment on the following statement. Supporters of this bill can know, this is on the letterhead of the people supporting this bill. Supporters of this bill can know they did everything in their power to prevent teen suicide. Those who choose not to support this bill will live with guilt, especially when teen suicide hits close to home. Do you agree with that particular statement? Thank you.
Representative DeSanto, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the question to the previous representative. I would say the literature where that particular statement is made came from an organization referred to as the Jason Flatt organization. I do not condone the language that was chosen on that specific piece of literature, and I think it was a poor choice of words.
Representative Boland, you still have the floor.
One more question for the sponsor of the bill.
Go ahead.
My question for the chief sponsor of the bill is, do you know where the Jason, or I should say, is the Jason Flack organization, foundation located, headquartered in the state of South Dakota? Thank you.
Representative DeSanto, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I would. It is located in Tennessee.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 129. Any further remarks on Senate Bill 129? Representative Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we are asking for additional training to be done in the form of continuing education for our teachers on this issue. And the reason we're doing that is because it's a real problem. It's not just a problem in Tennessee. It's a problem of epidemic proportions in our state. Pine Ridge, 200 suicide attempts. Eagle Butte, suicide attempts in the dozens. So you tell me today, do you really think that we shouldn't add some additional training because it might be a burden on continuing education on the time of our teachers? You know, it's not just Indian country where it's a problem. We just had a suicide attempt in Hartford not very long ago. We're talking about a life here, and I think it's important that our teachers are prepared with the kind of resources that will help them early identify this sort of situation. This is not a mere issue of accreditation and transferring of credits. We're talking about lives here. And I think it makes sense to pass this kind of legislation and to make sure the kids that are in front of our teachers receive the kind of attention that's needed when they have a crisis, and the teachers are prepared to deal with this sort of situation, and I'll ask you to support the bill.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on Senate Bill 129. Representative Greenfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the body. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, Dolan, South Dakota, small school, one suicide completed. I'll never forget that morning. when one of my students didn't come to school. And I was called outside as a study hall teacher saying, so-and-so won't be here. He took his life today. And I said, how can I go back in to his classmates and what do I say? And they said, well, we don't know. I guess we're going to wait for somebody that knows something to come along. Well, we waited, and finally my husband, who was teaching at the time, said, get some counselors here. I mean, we were running around like chickens with our heads cut off because we didn't know what to do. We hadn't been trained. And so I think it's very important that we do get some training, because I'll tell you what, the guilt that the fellow students felt, the guilt that the teachers felt, was just absolutely astounding, because we kept thinking, was there something that we should have noticed? Was there something that we should have done in order to prevent this? The training is important. We had a girl who was going to attempt suicide after that. And we knew what questions to ask. We knew that we should go to that person and say, if you were going to commit suicide, what would you do it with? Because we had been trained at that point in time, too late for the first person, that if that person said with a gun or with a knife, if they blurted it out right away, you knew that their intent was very, very serious, that they had made out a plan. And so anything that a school can do as in-service, and we're always looking for in-services in our schools, anything they can do to train the teachers to better know would be a step in the right direction. So I ask you to cast a green vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Greenfield. Representative Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Think about when we were in school. If you're like me, you can't really count on your hands, one hand, how many friends that you had, how many peers took their own lives. Out of all your years that you were in school, that was very rare. But as our culture has changed, we've got a shift in culture, and there are abuses and stressors and things that are happening to young people. And there is an understanding, kind of an all-pervading teaching that there's really no purpose for life. Your birth was an accident. All of creation was an accident. And if your birth is an accident and your death is an accident and everything in between then is an accident, I mean, why live? That's why so many kids are self-destructive. And so many kids choose a permanent solution to a temporary problem, which is suicide. I mean, if I could make every adult and every peer of these kids, if we can make them just take an hour to learn, to spot what somebody who is considering suicide, what they look like, I mean, wouldn't we do it? If we can make everybody do that. Just by the nature of my own job, I've met far too many individuals, not just kids, but adults, who've been tempted to do this. Why not then make sure that the adults who spend so much time, more time than most parents with their own kids, during the week, why don't we have those adults, those teachers, make sure they know how to spot a kid who is wanting to check out of life on earth, check out on their families, check out on their friends, check out on everything, because they're in a temporary place that is just, to them, too painful to go on dealing with. Well, they need some help. They need somebody who can see it and help them. So I'd encourage you, why not? Let's green vote this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Craig. Further remarks, Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question for the sponsor, please.
State your question.
Under this, Jason Flack, in Tennessee, what are the statistics? Have they seen an improvement since this legislation has been passed down there in, 10 other states?
Representative DeSanto, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I would. That was addressed in committee, and there has been a reduction in the states that it's passed. I believe that the number was around a 30% reduction is what they stated in committee in states where it had been passed.
Representative May, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that answer. You know, on the reservation, we're dealing with this, it's just an epidemic. And I have seen countless programs and different organizations that have reached out and tried to help in this area. I don't think any of our schools would ever resist any more help. With that said, I resisted this just a little bit. I hate putting more mandates on our teachers. Our teachers are already, especially down home, they're so overwhelmed with all the problems. They're not able to teach the basics, the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic because we are so overwhelmed with the social aspects that they're dealing with on a daily basis. So I suppose this is one more avenue that we can use, but I want to caution this body. Just because you pass a law or just because you mandate something doesn't mean it's going to change. Until we as a community and individuals, adults, we have to be the adult in the room and start addressing some of these really tough issues that our kids are dealing with. And until we're willing to step up to the plate and do that, we're not going to see a reduction in suicide. That's just the bottom line. I feel sorry for the teachers. I feel sorry for them, what they're dealing with on a daily basis. My daughter's been choked. She's been beaten, threatened. The one boy, 6th grade boy, think about this, you guys. 6th grade boy chokes her. And as they're on the floor, he starts crying, "You're the only one that cared for me." It's not enough to just pass bills and legislate money and make requirements of people that are dealing with our children. It's a way bigger issue than that. Way bigger. And so I'm reluctantly going to support this, but you can bet that I'm going to follow up, and I want to see results. We've got to start seeing results, or all of this is for nothing. So I encourage you to go ahead and support the bill. I'm going to support it reluctantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative May. Further remarks on Senate Bill 129? Representative, go ahead.
I've got just a comment to make on this. I was kind of involved with this at home. As most of you know, I worked with kids for about 45 years. And I had a gentleman come to me one night with his coach. He wanted me to sign some papers for him because he needed to go somewhere on a trip. So I signed his papers, and I knew from the time he walked into my house there was something wrong. And when they was ready to leave, I called the coach over and I said, "There's something wrong with this kid. He's not the same as he used to be." And he committed suicide that night. So I think this is a good bill, and I urge you to pass it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Shrimp. Further remarks? Representative Partridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Suicide is certainly a problem. I think the good representative from Yankton mentioned that we've all been affected by it. I certainly have. I lost my uncle to suicide, and I think those who engage in that are helpless, scared at the end of their rope, and like he said, leave a lot of questions. But I'd ask you to resist this bill for three reasons. Number one is the answer to regulators, compliance officers, legislators, senators, congressmen, whatever, to a lot of ills in our society seems to be an hour of education. I can tell you, as one who has to sit through countless hours of continuing ed for all the ills that happened on Wall Street in 2008, we now deal with all of that through education and ongoing education for all these problems that happened. I get it. There's a problem out there. There's sin in the world. But mandating education from a governmental body standpoint, I don't think is the answer. Number two, I had questions with regard to the cost on this. I just think, and I can tell you from our industry standpoint, it costs quite a bit of money to put these things on, whether they're online or in person. You know, they're quite expensive. And finally, number 3, I'm a bit shocked that those of us that are conservative and want local government are looking to government, a bigger entity, to fix our local problems. We're not looking to the church in this example. We're looking to government to fix a problem with an hour of education. I don't think that's the answer. And I'd urge you to vote red on this bill, even though I can tell you from the bottom of my heart, suicide is a great concern and one that I'm emotionally tied to in my family. But I separate that as it relates to looking to government to fix a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Partridge. Representative Russell.
The speaker from Pennington County hit on the point that I guess I was wondering when I walked in here today. And then I heard that compelling testimony from the representative from Dolan, and as I walked around here, I ran into Pogney and Mr. Munson. And I asked him, I said, what do you think on this bill? He said they think it's okay. And I guess from my perspective, I just absolutely hate these mandates. But under this circumstance where the Department of Education has not promulgated any rules or done anything in the area where they probably should have a long time ago, I guess it does fall upon us through our representative government to actually go forward with this kind of thing. And if the lobbyist for if the education lobby doesn't have a problem with it, it's kind of hard for me to say that I shouldn't. The education department and the education committees have been so overwhelmed with doing their Common Core and a lot of these other things that maybe this slipped through the cracks. So under the circumstances, I think that we probably ought to support this and make sure that we are confronting this issue, because I can't tell you, I represent teachers in the Ulrich School District, and this is a sincere problem with the suicides coming off that reservation. And I think that we probably ought to confront this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks? Representative Howgard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I echo the comments of the representative from Pennington County, but at the same time, the churches have not engaged in this. And so many kids these days, it's amazing how many you find that have never attended a church in all of their teen years all the way up through their 30s and 40s. There's lots of people that have no connection to a church, and I think it's been mentioned before that our culture is so degraded that there's not a sincere foundational belief system that there is a God in heaven anymore. And so when these kids are faced with these challenges, oftentimes they have no perspective that there's an eternity to deal with. And so they just pull the switch and life is over. And I would agree that the churches should be the ones stepping up to the plate and dealing with this. I really think that's where it should be. But sadly, we aren't. We mandate math and science and English and a variety of things. Now we've taken God so much out of the equation that there's no reason for kids to hold back. And I guess we're at that end stage of a society where you have to start mandating some of these other things. If you're not governed by that which is within, you're going to have to be governed by that which is from without. And so these young folks need to have at least some exposure to the issues they should be watching for. I'd love it if the churches would engage and offer to be part of the education process. Maybe they will. And maybe we can all go back to our churches and encourage them to come up with some means by which they can engage at least the students or the young people within the church body, but maybe to offer services to the schools and actually come forward and make some presentations. That would be great too. So I'm reluctantly going to support this bill. It's, as I've mentioned before, I conduct these hearings every week. And when I was home on Friday, I conducted 2 more hearings. And that's for people who are in danger to self or others. And it's just dramatically increasing issue, and we need to deal with it. Sadly, it's going to be through this kind of a mandate. I don't think it puts a lot of pressure or expense on any of the schools, but they need to address it. And as we've seen, so many teen suicides taking place, and it goes all the way down into preteen suicides. So young people are despairing. And we have a responsibility to make sure that they at least hear that there's a God in heaven with whom they have to deal. And hopefully our churches will re-engage. There's so many ways that they have stepped out of the equation. They're not involved like they used to be. We didn't even have a Department of Social Services for the most part back in the 60s. And now we've asked the state to step in and take care of everything. So hopefully this helps in some small way with the public schools and maybe even private schools, but I would encourage all of us to re-engage with our churches and try to be more involved in society and speak out on these things and give hope for the kids that don't have hope. Because one of the mandates, the main mandate of the church is to consider and look out for the widows and orphans in their distress. And we've created a whole society of widows and orphans, not like it used to be, but now we've got these families that are fractured and shattered and spread all over the world. And now it's the church's role to try to pick up those pieces. So that will hopefully be what happens, that the churches get involved again, but at this point I think this is an appropriate bill.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks? Representative Westra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully defer my time to the bill's prime sponsor.
Representative DeSanto.
A couple of closing remarks I'd like to make after some of the discussion we've had today is I would like to point out that North Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana, our neighboring states, all have passed the same legislation. Tennessee is the first state that passed this legislation, and in 3 years, they had a 28% drop in their suicide rate, specifically within their state. I think that's pretty significant. As far as the cost to the schools, the Jason Flatt organization, who really helped put this bill together, has brought resources to the table that are available for free, no cost at all to the school district. And the school districts will then be able to, in conjunction with the Department of Education, take a look at that curriculum. As far as local control is concerned, of course, we all want local control, but it's been left up to local control. Again, I'd like to reiterate, every 11 days in South Dakota, we lose someone to suicide. That's what local control has left us at. We can do better than that. And I would ask you, why did we become legislators? Did we become legislators to pass duck bills? Or, right? We became legislators because we want to make South Dakota a better state. I believe that this is one of the most significant bills you will pass this year because it will have a direct influence on the children and the teenagers of South Dakota. Thank you.
Further remarks? Representative Bordeaux.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the body, I'll try to be brief. I rise in support of this bill. As somebody who's lost his uncle, I too have concerns about suicide. And it wasn't as big an issue for me until more recently. I have 7 kids in the Todd County school system. One of my children, she stays with her grandparents. And my other kids, they Snapchat or they do this stuff all the time on the phone. And up until about 2 weeks ago, I didn't realize that my daughter was cutting herself. And then she put a Snapchat on there, and the kids took a picture of it, and they showed it to us parents. And it said, the struggle is real. And she had several cuts on her arm. Now, I had no idea. My kids like to wear sweaters, and they hide this. Now, if they can hide it from me, the parent, they can certainly hide it from their teacher. I understand the difference between the government trying to impose things on people and local control and what our party wants us to do. But this is a serious issue, and it doesn't just affect Indian country. It exponentially, as you heard from many testify today, it exponentially affects us. And it was only about 2009 that the Rosebud Reservation had the highest suicide rate in the world for 15 to 24-year-old young men. And the same could be said, like I said, my daughter, she's 11 years old. I ask you to support this bill. I think 1 hour will help our teachers be able to better identify this problem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Bordeaux. Further remarks? Representative McCleary?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this will be real quick. The one thing that has not been brought out was brought out in Health and Human Services Committee. Asking the survey of the children and kids in high school and junior high, who is the one person you would feel comfortable talking to about suicide or your situation? Number 1, teacher. Number 2, coach. Number 3, your friend. Green light, please.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 129? Further remarks on Senate Bill 129? Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 129. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed, nay. Clerk will unlock the voting machine. Members will proceed to vote.
May votes aye. Lateral votes aye. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 57 yeas, 11 nays, 2 excused.
Senate Bill 129, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Title deemed correct.
Senate Bill 31, an act to revise certain provisions regarding the sentencing and supervision of prison inmates and parolees with suspended sentences.
Senate Bill 31, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. This bill comes from the Department of Corrections and came through the Judiciary Committee. This bill reinforces that the Department of Corrections and the Board of Pardons and Paroles have the ability to impose and enforce supervision conditions on an inmate with a suspended sentence. This bill also reinforces that an inmate with a suspended sentence is subject to the same supervision and revocation procedures as a parolee. This bill provides a mechanism to address low-level felonies for people on parole in a manner consistent with the Public Safety Improvement Act. This came through the Senate unopposed, and there were 2 no votes in House Judiciary Committee. I'd ask for your favorable consideration for Senate Bill 31.
Thank you, Representative Peterson. Further remarks on Senate Bill 31? Any further remarks on Senate Bill 31? Any remarks on Senate Bill 31? Hearing no further remarks, question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 31. Those in favor vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine. The members will proceed to vote.
Keller votes aye. Hager votes aye. May votes aye. Representative Lateral, Qualm, Schaefer, Shanefish. Shanefish votes aye. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
The clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 67 yeas, 1 nay, 2 excused.
Senate Bill 31, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
Senate Bill 26, an act to revise certain provisions concerning sex offender registration and to require an offender to notify of intended foreign travel.
Senate Bill 26, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks?
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a Attorney General's bill, and essentially what it does is it requires that anyone who's on the sex offender registry who is going to be traveling abroad has to give 21 days notice to either the chief of police or the sheriff. We made a couple of provisions in the committee to make sure that it was clear that you could notify either the chief of police or the sheriff whenever you have to register as a sex offender, as when you move to a county or working in a county, that kind of thing. And it also liberalized that you can use a driver's license and or some kind of identification card with your photograph on it or a passport, and that you have to provide that information. So it's simply a cleanup bill. It is helping the Attorney General do his job in law enforcement, so we'd ask for your passage on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Russell. Further remarks on Senate Bill 26? Further remarks on Senate Bill 26? Hearing no further remarks, the question before the House is final passage of Senate Bill 26. Those in favor vote yea, those opposed nay. Clerk will unlock the voting machine and members will proceed to vote.
Keller votes aye. Representative Deutsch, Hager, okay. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 65 yeas, 5 excused.
Senate Bill 26, having received a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
Senate Bill 133, an act to revise certain provisions regarding shared services provided by the state to school districts, the sharing of services of school district employees, the Classroom Innovation Grant Program, and educator mentoring and certification reciprocity.
Senate Bill 133, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Representative Sly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Senate Bill 133, we spent a lot of time on 1182, but recognize that that was just one piece. This is not all just about funding and more money. It's about addressing a lot of the things that came out of the task force. Some things that we found. Our state needs to increase the pool of teachers and to retain the great teachers already in our classrooms. Students need equal access to learning opportunities. Taxpayers need assurances that their tax dollars are being used effectively and as intended. And school districts know there is equity in the funds they receive. So when we're looking at that, when we look at Senate Bill 133, there are some things in there that address those things that came out of the task force. One part of it is looking at voluntary shared services. And those could include areas at the state level, such as purchasing or payroll or software licensing. And we've already done it with internet bandwidth and student information systems. So that's one piece of it. There will also be incentives for sharing staff between districts. The cost to the state to pick up these services would be less than an individual district that was saved by not having them. If you only have one teacher, you only need that teacher for certain subject areas, you can share them with another district, and providing incentives for those districts to do that. It is true that some districts are doing that now, but it is a way to address the teacher shortage and also a way that we can make sure that all students have high-quality teachers in their classrooms. Another piece of the bill is e-learning, and we've talked about that a little bit. Northern State University has an e-learning center, and with that, they have been providing classes to school districts throughout the state, especially those districts that cannot find the teachers. Now, we all know that the best way is to have a teacher in front of a classroom, but we also know that that is not possible in all cases. And there have been a great number of requests above and beyond what they can provide right now for the students in our state. And so this bill would provide to expand that capacity with it. Another part of it is to create classroom innovation grants. And so that would be to incentivize teachers' training and classroom access to virtual learning across the state, and for helping to train those teachers to, whether you're in the classroom and you're having students that are accessing that, or whether you are one of those teachers. One of the areas that has been also that will be changed, but we already have it in statute, so we don't have to have it in this particular bill, is that we'll reinstate the funding for national board certification. That's another way that we're addressing those top high-quality teachers. We had it in place, we cut the funding, and the way it works is the state will pay $1,000 and the teachers' school will pay $1,000 for a period of 5 years, and that would be also paying it back for those years that we did not do that. There are a little over 100 teachers in our state that are national board certified. And with that, I'm going to have another person that was on the task force talk about a couple other parts of the bill, and I would ask for your support of Senate Bill 133.
Thank you, Representative Sly. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133? Representative Hawks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to make some comments about a couple sections in the bill that I am particularly pleased with and particularly proud to have worked with the Blue Ribbon Task Force on adding to this bill. In Section 4, excuse me, we insert language to allow for the promulgation of rules around reciprocity between states for teachers moving into South Dakota. So basically what we want to do is say that if a teacher from Minnesota or Iowa or Nebraska now wants to come to South Dakota because we've improved teacher salaries, we want to make it a little bit easier for them to do that. They've been through a teacher training program, an education training program. They are certified teachers in their states. We're checking to make sure that those standards are similar between states and allowing them the ease of moving from one state to another. These teachers have, as I said, completed an accredited teaching preparation course, and they'll be bringing their educational experience to South Dakota. This will help us in attracting new teachers to our classrooms. In Section 5, we are creating a mentoring program for teachers new to the profession. Mentoring programs have proven to be very effective in helping new teachers feel comfortable in the classroom and in keeping new teachers in the profession. I personally participated in the Professional Development Center program through University of South Dakota's College of Education. I was a teacher mentor, which means that I was a veteran teacher who stepped out of my classroom to mentor 2 new teachers in the classroom. One of those new teachers took over my classroom, one took over a middle school English classroom, and then I mentored them through that entire year on classroom management, on creating tests, on every aspect of classroom teaching to help them learn how to manage their classroom and learn how to be a more effective teacher. I'm proud to say that both of those mentee teachers that I worked with for that year are still teaching 8 years later, bucking the trend that most teachers, new teachers, leave the profession in the first 5 years. And I shouldn't say most, but over half. Over half of new teachers leave the profession in the first 5 years. Mentoring improves teacher retention and classroom confidence. That's good for student achievement. It's good for professionalism. It's good for keeping teachers and retaining them in our state. So I urge your support.
Thank you, Representative Fox. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133? Representative Cronin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of the 3 bills that we've only dealt on 1182 thus far, but there's 2 other bills to come. This bill, I think I finally stated it in committee. is the most important part of that three-legged plan. The teachers asked, one of the reasons, the top reasons that teachers leave the state is there's not enough preparation time. They don't know how, their structure's not quite conducive. Then there's other things, then salaries. Well, we've dealt with those too. And I remember when we were sitting here last year and the governor had a press conference talking about how we were going to get together, a group of folks, and come up with some solutions. Of all three of the bills, I still believe to this day, and I would hope you guys would recognize the importance of this bill. This bill not only gives them the tools they asked for, because guess what, folks? Politics don't. Politics don't. Politics do not just happen in this building. They're probably more so in each and every school, as they are in each and every private business, as they are in about any job you're in. But one of the things we can do is have that mentorship program, which the previous two speakers talked about, and giving them a little, you know what, here's how you deal with this, because you're new here. You don't necessarily have to learn the system, but you got to learn how to buck the system with horns, buck with horns. And I think that the most important part of it is that, on top of that, is that we have given them, in these three bills, everything they've asked for. Whether you think the funding formula is enough, or you think it's too much, or it's right, or it's wrong, this bill directly deals with the teachers, the instructors, which directly deal with the children. This is the most important part of a complex effort spanning $100 and some million. $5 million of it is in this bill, and this will be the shining beacon of the reform to education in South Dakota. I would urge your support.
Thank you, Representative Cronin. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133. Representative Steinhauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the previous speaker, and I was pleased to hear the sponsor speak to specifically payroll, because you may recall in one of my previous floor speeches, I mentioned how delighted I was to see that we have the same financial package in each of the districts. On page 1 of this bill, it says the Secretary can contract with the school districts to provide services. The software packages were, I'm sure, at great expense to each district. So I'm thrilled about e-learning and all of those things, but I want to talk about the efficiencies that can be gained because of this bill. Again, the financial people in your district, and I don't mean to pick on them, but we spend over $20 million in the state of South Dakota for the finance people in the school districts. If we can take and ask the Department of Ed to study the heck out of that software and what can they do to create efficiency. Doesn't mean those people have to leave their job. In business, we do continuous improvement projects. One of the first rules is you aren't going to work yourself out of a job. Good people that find ways to do things more efficiently, we can find a spot for them in the system, and I suspect that's probably the same case in the school districts. Right now, the school districts are sending information to the Department of Education. If they got the same financial package, they should be grabbing and pulling the information. So there's a lot of efficiency there. I just wanted to highlight that one particular area. So I think the bill in general is great. Please support it.
Thank you, Representative Steinhauer. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133? Further remarks on Senate Bill 133. Representative Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a question for the sponsor.
State your question.
As I look at the section referred to by the representative from Minnehaha County right before me, it talks about the fact that the Secretary of Education may also contract with any school district or other entity to provide services to school districts throughout the state. And specifically what I'm interested in is, as we think about this mid-central down there in Platte, I thought that the Secretary of Education already had the authority somewhere in statute to do exactly that. So I guess my question is there something that I'm missing about the discretion of the Secretary to make those types of contracts already?
Representative Sly, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I would. are you referring to Section 4 or Section 5 of the bill?
It would be Section 1.
Oh, I thought you said, from Minnehaha County. So you're talking about the goods and services?
I am.
You want to repeat your question,
Please
Representative
do.
Russell?
I thought that it says there that the Secretary of Education shall accept certain items, commodities, goods, and services, and they may also contract with any school district or entity to provide those services to districts throughout the state. And I would have thought that they would have already had that authority, so I'm just kind of curious as to why we would be amending the statute to put that into the statute.
Representative Slide, do you understand the question?
Thank you. When you said the representative from Minnehaha, my mind went over to the left of me instead of to the front of me, so I appreciate clarification with that. Well, what we have right now is with the, with the technology that they're doing, they contract with that, but it's very specific and limited of what we've done with that, and I think this is to provide so that we can go beyond that with additional services such as, the purchasing, payroll. Right now with technology, we're saving about half of the cost. I think it's it would cost $12 million for districts. It's about half of that, if I remember the numbers correctly. And that's the intent of this, is to be able to contract with districts so that they can provide those services. Does that answer your question?
Representative Russell, you still have the floor.
I believe it does, and I guess what I'm hopeful for is that it doesn't appear in here that we've in any way limited the discretion of the Secretary, and I would hope going forward that there is somebody who's essentially paying close attention to the implementation of different contracts, and that we manage them in a manner that actually maximizes the effect of them for our students, to make sure that there is in fact delivery of the services that we're either getting federal money for, or that the taxpayers of this state are paying for in their additional taxes that we here in Pierre have given them this particular year. Because my fear is that, like when I voted, I was the only Republican in the whole legislature to vote against one of the Build South Dakota programs, because I told the governor's office that I had very big concern about not putting any parameters on the discretion of the Board of Economic Development and the GOED in how they spent their money. And I think that the voters later took care of that, but we obviously ran into a great deal of difficulty because we as the legislature, I think in a lot of cases, are abdicating our responsibility to make sure that we put parameters in to make sure that the secretaries that the governor has actually make sure that their programs are effective, and that they are doing so in a manner that actually benefits the people of South Dakota. And so when I see something like this where we're giving authority without any kind of parameters, it makes me a little bit nervous, and I hope that someone in the administration will be minding the store a lot better than they have in the past. And with that, I thank you, and I support the bill.
Thank you, Representative Russell. For the remarks, Representative Hager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As with some of the previous individuals that have gotten up, including my friend from Gettysburg and the good representative from Meade and Pennington County to my right, I support this bill. I think there's a lot in it that's good. Like the new representative from Hartford indicated, the payroll software, that can be a really big deal. If we start to have some similar payroll processing, similarity in processing systems and payroll processing systems across the state, the next thing we could do is we could have our teachers covered under the state health insurance program. And that would be most likely a good thing. We'd have to study it. We got to make sure it makes sense, but that would be a good thing. And I look at those lines in sections something like 7 through 12, that first section, and And I like the idea of bidding and looking at shared services. You know, another thing we could do is we could competitively bid functions of the districts, including administration. And those are novel, out of the box ideas. But it makes sense to look at a lot of options to look for efficiencies and economies of scale. And so while I'm not proposing an amendment today, certainly I'm going to ask you to support this bill today, but I'm going to encourage you to continue to think creatively about the challenges our educational system faces today and in the future, and don't be afraid to come up with an idea that's just a little different. But today, let's pass this bill because this is a good bill.
Thank you, Representative Hager. Representative May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is probably a question maybe for the representative from Minnehaha County, since she's the one that kind of addressed it on the floor. I'm just curious about the mentoring part of this bill, Section 5. And it looks to me, prior to us mandating this, that we had allowed school districts to elect into and participate in this. So can you address that a little further, and why we're changing this from a school district to elect into it voluntarily to now making it a mandate, and maybe also the cost that's going to be associated with making this a mandate across the state for all districts?
Representative Hawks, do you understand the question? And would you like to answer it?
I can answer some parts of it, and then I might defer to my colleague from Pennington. There was a mentoring program in place at one time that was funded at a state level, I do believe. That funding was rescinded, and so the mentoring program kind of became a voluntary effort at school districts, where I can speak from experience on that. I know that we have many schools that offer a mentoring program for new teachers. The quality of that mentoring is sometimes questionable. As far as the funding mechanism and mandating it, I don't know that I'm the best person to answer that. I might defer to my colleague from Pennington.
Thank you,
Representative Sly, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would. Thank you for the question. And if you look at the lines 22 and 23, it says participation in the program is discretionary with each school district according to a mentor-teacher plan adopted by the school board for the school district. So each school district can decide if they want to do that or not. The reason for the mentoring is that we lose those teachers those very first years, and there will be a plan in place of like a program that can be used for mentoring. And actually there's a pilot program right now that's happening in kind of north central South Dakota in an area where they're having a very difficult time keeping teachers. And it's a combination between some online classes and then where they meet with the mentors. And I believe it's a grant right now. And it's been extremely effective, and it's been very helpful to retain those teachers in that really high need school. And another part of it is to provide a summer workshop program for new teachers. And that too is discretionary. There's no mandates in this at all. But if school districts need teachers and they have new teachers in their district, this is an opportunity for them to work to retain those teachers. And that's part of our pipeline issue. They're not staying in our schools for very long. So we need to, if we can keep those teachers in our schools for a longer period of time, that's to the benefit of everybody.
Thank you, Representative Sly. Representative May, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You still have the floor.
I agree with the mentoring program. I do agree with that part of it. But I always go back to this part of it, and I always think back at my kids and the dollars that I have spent on educating children in my household. And I have to look to my colleges now and say, why are these kids that are going into the teaching profession, why are they not receiving more time in the classroom? You know, a semester doesn't prepare you to go into a classroom in a lot of our schools. So I'm going to support this, but I don't think that as a parent and as a taxpayer, if we're going to have colleges that are going to prepare our kids to teach in a classroom, I think that we need to address the lack of preparedness for them to enter into the classroom. Because honestly, we're already paying for that, but we're not getting it. And so, yeah, I will support this, but that's a huge issue for me on this. And so I want to keep close eye on it. The other thing that I have concern about is Section 3 and the Center for Statewide E-Learning at Northern State University. And I hope I'm wrong, and like I said, I'm going to support this bill, but it concerns me when, and I know that we're having trouble getting math teachers and science teachers in some of these classrooms. Nobody knows that any better than me, where I'm at. And so I get that. But my concern is, are we moving towards removing and not even worrying about the teacher in the classroom and moving into a new area?
Marty yields.
Moving into a new area where we're not going to worry so much about the classroom in the teacher in the classroom. So I think it's something that we all need to keep an eye on, and I'm all for, you know, I know the e-learning is a great thing, but I just don't think that you know, we had the suicide bill, and we talked about the difference that teachers can make. And so I would hate to see us come to a point where we started relying on, say, an aide or somebody in the classroom directing the e-learning, and us not fulfilling the teacher positions in our classroom. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative May. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133. Representative Ring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm willing to stand corrected on this, but I believe that at least all of the state universities now, their teacher preparation program does include 2 semesters of what we used to call, at least, practice teaching. That program was piloted at USD with a Bush Foundation grant several years ago, and then I'm pretty sure has been expanded, as I say, to all the state universities so that they have a full year program. And along with the student teaching, then they also take some courses at the same time.
Thank you, Representative Ring. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133. Representative Greenfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm also going to support this part of the bill because I think it is a good part. I think it shows fairness to our small schools. I think we can see that some of our small schools are going to be lacking in teachers. I had a discussion over the weekend with a person in my district who said that despite the fact that teachers are going to get raises, they know that there's going to be at least 6 to 7 openings, so it really doesn't matter about the raises. Some are even leaving the teaching profession. This will allow the linking up and the sharing of teachers, and it will give some financial incentive to do so, which I think will really help our small schools, you know. And I hate to be the one I keep thinking of the little child's book that says the emperor has no clothes. Well, I'm the one here standing here telling you that we can't, there's a shortage of teachers, yes, but we can't hire people that don't exist. And folks, I'm telling you, from state to state to state, they do not exist. And so this will help our schools be able to collaborate and get a little bit creative and help share the teachers. So I thank you, and I would ask that you vote green.
Thank you, Representative Greenfield. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133. Further remarks on Senate Bill 133. Hearing no further remarks, the question for the House is final passage of Senate Bill 133. Those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed, nay. The clerk will unlock the voting machine, and members will proceed to vote.
Hager votes aye and Otten votes aye. Partridge. Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 67 yeas, 3 excused.
Senate Bill 133, having received a majority vote of the members elect, is hereby declared passed. Any questions on the title? Seeing none, the title is deemed correct.
Senate Bill 136, an act to permit certain cropland along lakes, rivers, and streams to be
Of allegiance by our pages Bridget DeCam from Platte and Matthew Eshe from Canton.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for giving us the blessings of another day. We pray your blessings on the members of this House as they set about doing the important work that faces them. In this long day ahead, help them to make wise decisions and to carry out their responsibilities with high hopes for a better future for our state. May your blessings be present with them throughout this day and every day. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will please call the roll.
Representative Anderson, Bartling, Beal, Bolin, Bordeaux, Bruner, Campbell, Conzett, Craig, Cronin, Deutsch, DeSanto, Dryden, Duval, Fikert, Gibson, Gosh, Greenfield, Hager, Harrison, Haugard, Hawks, Hawley, Heineman, Holmes, Hunhoff, Hunt, Jensen, Johns, Kaiser, Killer, Kirschman, Klum, Langer, Lateral, Marty, May, McCleary, Mickelson, Munsterman, Norstrup, Otten, Partridge, Peterson, Qualm, Rasmussen, Ring, Romkema, Rounds, Rosum, Russell, Schaefer, Schoenbeck, Shanefish, Schremp, Sly, Soley, Solem, Stalser, Steinhauer, Stevens, Tulson, Versio, Werner, Westra, Wick, Willardson, Woolman, Zickman, Speaker Wink.
Here.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Approval of the journal.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Legislative Procedure respectfully reports that the Chief Clerk of the House has had under consideration the House Journal of the 32nd day. All errors, typographical or otherwise, are duly marked in the temporary journal for correction, and we hereby move the adoption of the report. Respectfully submitted, Dean Wing, Chair.
Those in favor of approving the journal signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Journal is approved. At this time, I'm going to ask the new pages to stand up against the rail here, and I will swear them in. This is our last set of pages, and so we will welcome them here after we get the oath. State your name. Do solemnly swear. That I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of South Dakota, and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of page according to the best of my abilities. Congratulations. Let's welcome the new pages. Is the Wagner government class here? Raise your hands. There we are. On behalf of Representative Qualm and Bartling, we'd like Take your seats, please. Leading us in prayer today is Pastor John Armstrong from the Fort Pierre Ministerial Association. That'll be followed by our pledge.